Welcome to Our Culture to the World. I'm Melva Persico. Come with me and meet new people and share their experiences in this episode of Our Culture to the World. My guest today is Liam Teague, and Liam is a professor of music and the head of Steelpan Studies at Northern Illinois University. But I cannot really introduce him that well. I'll allow him to introduce himself.
Well, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. As you mentioned before, I'm professor of music at Northern Illinois University and head of Steelpan Studies. At NIU, we offer degrees in music with a specific emphasis on the steel pan. And so students attend this university pursuing their bachelor's and master's degrees.
Wow, yes, that's good. So tell us where you're from, um, and maybe we could actually go into why, your musical background. How long have you been in this field? Where did you study and that kind of thing?
So I'm originally from Trinidad and Tobago, of course. And I started in essence with music probably around the age of 11. My father, he had a Cub Scout troop, and one of our members brought a steel pan to a meeting, and he played it for us, and I just fell in love with the sound. And right there and then I asked my father, if he could maybe take me to a pan yard so I could start learning. And so said, so done. I started playing with the T and Tech Motown Steel Orchestra. Then I transitioned to the Hillside Symphony, two relatively small bands in the south of Trinidad. Um, like many folks that attended high school in the Caribbean, I started playing the recorder actually before the steel pan, but I took it seriously. I actually love that instrument. And so I was trying to play, relatively challenging pieces on it. And subsequently, after the steel pan, I learned the violin. And this was through a wonderful lady by the name of Mrs. Shirley James, who was originally from Jamaica but lived in Trinidad. And she, I believe, was the founder of the National Youth Orchestra of Trinidad and Tobago. And one day at a steel band, actually at a Trinidad and Tobago music festival, she met me and she asked me if I would like to learn another instrument. And I said, why not? And she made it possible for me to get violin lessons and join the youth orchestra. And that really paid off a lot for me in that it exposed me to the different type of music and a lot of violin music. I've transferred over to the steel pan, and it's been very instrumental in taking me into different musical worlds. You know.
Yes, 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 that's beautiful. So you now you said steel pan music and you said, Trinidad. I'm from Trinidad, of course. Yes, so because Trinidad, Trinidad is the home of the steel pan. So,
Correct.
could you just give us a brief overview of, steel band music, how it began in Trinidad and how it has evolved and spread around the world?
Sure. So the steel pan or steel drum, as it's called outside of the English-speaking Caribbean, is the national instrument of Trinidad and Tobago. But it's an instrument, of course, that's been embraced by the world. So obviously Trinidad is the birthplace of the steel pan, but folks play it all over the world. And it's considered to be the youngest family of acoustic instruments to be invented in the 20th century, so non-electric instruments. Um, and it was created, the pioneers of steel pans were primarily Afro-Trinidadians, many of whom didn't have formal music training or training in acoustics, but they had a vision and they had the fortitude to follow through with that vision, even in the face of many obstacles. And so, as I mentioned, they were primarily Afro-Trinidadians. Many of them were teenagers or perhaps in their early 20s, and I still marvel today at what they were able to accomplish, and in the face of adversity. And so people like myself were the beneficiaries of their sacrifice and vision. I'm really grateful. um During the embryonic stages of the steel pan, the instrument was somewhat limited in terms of what could be played on it and even the sound of the steel pan. You would, if you hear early recordings of the instrument, they're not tuned with what's called harmonics, so they don't ring as much. They don't sound as rich and defined as they do today. But again, Steelpan tuners and builders experimented, eventually started including overtones, which helped with the overall sound of the instrument. Um, and then they added more and more notes onto the instrument, allowing for a wider repertoire, right? Wider range of music to be played. And so I humbly consider this instrument to be one of the, not only one of the most beautiful instruments in the world, but definitely one of the most versatile instruments.
Yes, yes, I agree with you. I mean, I don't play, but
Uh-huh.
I've listened to a lot of steel band music, and it, you know, from classical to jazz to soca to everything, you can play using that instrument. So um as you mentioned, that instrument was born in Trinidad and Tobago, which is a part of the English speaking Caribbean. And of course, it quickly spread to places like where I'm from, Guyana, right close by, Barbados, and other places in the English speaking Caribbean. But then, as you mentioned, it's an international instrument now. So, what are your observations about you mentioned some of this, but maybe if you could expand a little bit on the interest in this art form, in this instrument, and outside of its original birthplace in the English
Sure.
speaking Caribbean.
The interest in the steel pan is huge. I've been very fortunate to be able to travel around the world performing and teaching. And I've been able to visit, whether it's elementary schools, middle schools, high schools, colleges, and they have steel pan in their programs. Um, and it's just amazing at the love and passion that folks have for this instrument, and it's an instrument that I think so many people embrace. Part of it has to do with its accessibility. As I mentioned, I used to play the violin for several years, and I love the instrument. But I still remember, my first few months learning the violin, and it was not a pleasant experience because it takes quite a while before you can get a really nice sound out of it. It hurts a little bit when you first hold on to it. Um, but with the steel pan, it's very player friendly. For most people, you just need to show them where a few notes are, and within the space, I would say, of a few minutes, they can learn relatively simple songs. And I think that instant gratification is very attractive to folks of all walks of life, truth be told. And I've seen so many things happen in the steel pan universe, uh, profound in profound directions that the instrument is being taken into by folks who are not necessarily from Trinidad or the Caribbean, and in many, in a sense, it's very, very healthy because I'm not necessarily a fan of the status quo. I have a healthy respect for tradition and for the history of the instrument, but I'm also a big advocate of original music for steel pan and taking it into directions that are, relatively untapped. And I think that's sort of the mindset, even with the pioneers of these instruments, people like the late Dr. Eleanor Nett, um, Dr. Anthony Williams, Clifford Alexis, the late great Dr. Clifford Alexis. So many of the pioneers, they were visionaries. And so in some senses, I feel like I fit into that mold.
But tell me, because I thought, what are some of the avenues in which you're seeing this the instrument go, and music using this instrument? What are some of these new ways that you're seeing?
Sure. Um, well, there are many, many people today that are doing fantastic things on the instrument. I won't single out people. One of the reasons for why I say that, David Rudder, the great calypsonian, he has a calypso called Dedication, a praise song. And in there he mentions to name a few would make the others feel small. So I'm
Mhm.
always very cautious, but there are many people doing great things. And they're taking the instrument into avenues such as performing with orchestras. That's something that, I've done for quite a number of years as a soloist, playing with jazz combos, with big bands, um, with collegiate steel bands, high school steel bands, and just writing new music that's not necessarily calypso or soca,
Mhm.
or not necessarily in 4/4 time. Lots of mixed meters and, challenging music intellectually, but also emotionally appealing. So those are things that really resonate with me, and it makes me really excited about the future of this instrument.
Good, great, great. Yes, yes. And I've seen a few videos with yes, you playing with orchestra and with jazz ensembles and so on. Yes. So let's talk a little bit more about you as an ambassador of Steelpan music and of your country and this music form that originated in your country.
Well, as I mentioned earlier, I feel very fortunate to play this instrument and also to be an educator. Um, so many people around the world, even if they are vaguely familiar with the steel pan, they have sort of a stereotypical view of it, of an instrument that's just relegated to the beaches of the Caribbean, or that can be performed only at, Hawaiian theme parties, etc.
Mhm.
And the thing about that is, it speaks to the power of this instrument. It's a very versatile instrument. It makes people very happy. You can dance to it, but that's not exclusively what can be done on the steel pan. So again, I try to shine a light not just on what I do, but what people all over the world, do with the instrument from a progressive context. And I feel fortunate again to be sort of an unofficial ambassador for Trinidad and Tobago, and by extension the Caribbean, and just showing the different possibilities of the instrument. And I love breaking down barriers musically and otherwise, you know. I can tell you, there have been many times where I've, stepped on stage to perform with a symphony orchestra, and, while everybody's warming up, I can see some of the musicians looking at me in a skeptical fashion because, they're thinking, well, what is this guy doing here? They're thinking, well, it's not serious music. And so what I do to sort of initiate, just how serious this instrument is. Sometimes I'll warm up playing pieces that are very challenging for their respective instruments. Like because I play the violin, I know pieces that are really challenging. So I might warm up playing something like the Flight of the Bumblebee or Niccolo Paganini's Moto Perpetuo. And in a sense, it's using honey as opposed to vinegar to make a point, and suddenly I see the musicians turn towards me and they put down their instruments and they start listening, and, they nod their heads and they realize this is serious business, and I love doing that because it's my way of selling the instrument in a serious manner without being disrespectful to people or making them feel badly,
Right, right.
perhaps about their preconceived notion.
Yes, yes, yes. That's a good way of doing it, yes. And so I read somewhere that you received a a national award or more than one national awards from your country. So how has Trinidad and Tobago recognized your contribution to the field of steel pan music?
Sure. Since I was a youngster, teenager growing up in Trinidad, I've received different awards. A few years ago, I was fortunate to receive the national award, the Hummingbird Award Silver, one of the highest awards from Trinidad and Tobago. And subsequent to that, the Answer Macal Caribbean Award for Excellence. Quite an honor, and just recently, last year, I believe, my home city of San Fernando, they honored me by presenting the keys to the city of San Fernando, so that was quite an experience, so I definitely needed to go back to Trinidad for that. It was a little tight because of my schedule, but it was wonderful. So I have, even though I haven't lived in Trinidad since I was 19 years old, and I'm 49 now, I have a special place in my heart for Trinidad and Tobago and the Caribbean by extension. So it's always a special feeling when I can go back there and work in different capacities.
Right. And I'm sure like most Caribbean people, whenever you get the opportunity to go back, you do, right?
Most definitely, I mean, especially for the food, because where I live here, it's about 60 miles west of Chicago. There's not a huge Caribbean population, so you're not gonna be getting any roti or doubles here anytime soon.
Oh, I know where I live, though. I gotta go to Atlanta to get that.
Oh my goodness.
Yes, yes. Now, you mentioned, collaborations, playing with orchestras and so on. So, could you mention maybe some of the more notable performances and collaborations that you've had?
Sure, there have been a lot. Most recently, actually, I created a new recording of primarily pieces which I commissioned different composers to write. So some of my colleagues here at NIU wrote pieces for me. So these would be pieces with the piano, steel pan and cello, steel pan and harp. I have a duo with one of my colleagues here. Her name is Faye Seaman, professor of harp. And so we have a duo called Pangelic, just to play on words. When you think about the harp, you think angelic, and of course,
Right.
pan, angelic. And then performing with orchestras all over the world. The the National Symphony Orchestra in Washington, D.C. I was very fortunate to premiere a concerto many years ago by the great composer Andy Akiho, who's one of the young stars in the compositional world, also a steel pan, fantastic steel pan player, percussionist. Performing with, jazz luminaries like the great Paquito de Rivera, from originally from Cuba, and just playing in different contexts. There's so many things that stand out. Being able to arrange several years for the Panorama competition in Trinidad and Tobago. So I often jokingly say to people, I'm like a nosy musical neighbor. I'm in your business whether you like it or not.
Yes, so nosy musical neighbor Liam Teague requested that one of his colleagues at NIU, Robert Chappell, compose a piece which is a concerto for steel pan and percussion ensemble. That piece is entitled Algorithm, and we're going to listen to just a little snippet of Algorithm, a concerto for steel pan and percussion composed by Robert Chappell. I know you've had some um, smaller collaborations because how I got to see you and to meet you was when you had a collaboration just in the spring, this past spring of 2023 with the Clemson University Steel
Mm.
Band. And yeah, I was the sole voice in the audience when you said, anybody from the Caribbean here?
Ah, I remember clearly. Yes.
So, and in addition to those big names, I know you also, as you mentioned, well, you were at Clemson, and then you did
Mhm.
mention, other schools and colleges and so on that you
Yes, yes.
collaborate with.
All of those collaborations are very, very meaningful for me, because again, it gives me an opportunity to not just share with the audiences, in attendance at the concerts, but the students that play the instrument, because many times they may not be aware of just what can be done. And very often when I visit a university and or high school, in addition to performing with the steel bands, I'll do clinics, master classes, workshops, where I speak about the history of Steelpan. I speak about music from yesteryear, what's happening in the contemporary world of Steelpan, you know, because a lot of times folks are just not aware, they're sometimes in a bubble. And so this is sort of me again acting as an unofficial ambassador for the instrument.
Mhm. Yes, yes, yes. And that's very important, having that background and then seeing learning about the evolution and what can be done and so on. All of that is extremely important. Now, you mentioned that composition,
Hmm.
working with colleagues on composition, but you are a composer as well. So maybe could you tell us a bit about some of your compositions? Maybe what are some of the genres and you compose is probably not just for yourself, but are your compositions available to other musicians?
Yes, definitely. So I started composing when I was a teenager, probably about 14 or 15. Um, And in the steel pan universe, relative to, let's say, instruments like the violin or the piano, the body of original material is very small, again, relatively speaking. And so since I was a teenager, as I mentioned before, I've been creating music for the instrument, primarily for the steel pan as a solo instrument. So I have compositions like Raindrops and A Visit to Hell, Impressions. But I also have some pieces for steel band as well as a number of arrangements. Um, it's very, very important, I think, to create for the instrument as opposed to playing transcriptions of, let's say, music from composers like Mozart, Beethoven, beautiful music. Many of them, those pieces work well on steel pan. But of course, Mozart and Beethoven, they weren't thinking about the steel pan when they created music. So it's really, really important for us to create specifically for the instrument. And then many of these pieces are published, and so several people will include them on their recitals at university or perform them in a professional setting, you know. And so in a sense, it's like the gift that keeps on giving, you know. Um, and as I get older, I think about the future, and I'm always thinking about, doing whatever I can for folks that I probably will never meet, when I'm no longer here. That really, really means a lot to me. So just doing whatever I can while I can.
So, yes, and so I'm sure that the music world and the world of steel pan music, the is very grateful to you and will continue to be grateful to you for your compositions. Now, as a professor, you studied and you in the US and you teach in the US.
Yes.
And what have been some of your successes as a professor of steel pan music, and maybe your reflections on
Sure.
working in this field in this outside of the Caribbean?
Sure. Well, one thing I'd like to make clear, and I often have to do this for, prospective students, is that what I teach actually is music with a steel pan emphasis. Uh,
Ah,
some folks may say, well, why should I leave the Caribbean to come to the US to study steel pan? You know, and so I make it clear that yes, you're going to be here to study music. It's going to be very holistic,
right.
but the steel pan is the main medium that you'll be using. So when I teach, we do one-on-one lessons. They're called applied lessons. And this can encompass everything from technique to sight reading, the ability to read music at sight,
Mhm.
improvisation, arranging, composition. And truth be told, it was never a goal of mine when I was younger to teach.
Mhm.
My main passions were performing and creating music. Um, a long story short, the the former director and the founder of the NIU Steel Band program, the late Al O'Connor, an American who was the head of percussion studies here. He was also the associate dean of music. He was one of the people, along with the late Dr. Clifford Alexis from Trinidad and Tobago, who that they recruited me to NIU. They heard me performing as a teenager in Trinidad, and they got me here. And Al O'Connor, he saw something in me, and he knew that once he retired, he wanted me to take over the program. And so I inherited the program from him. But at the time, I wasn't passionate about teaching, but it was a fantastic opportunity. So
Right.
why not? Over time, I really grew to love it, and no, it's such a passion of mine, especially when I see, my students when they graduate and I see they're fulfilling their dreams. Some of them are professors in their own right. They're publishing. They're doing many things that I haven't done in the world of ethnomusicology, compositions, etc., and just living their dreams through the medium of the steel pan. So it's very, very fulfilling, And so if I have played just a small role in that, I'm very, very thankful and fortunate.
Right. Yes, yes, exactly. Yeah. That's it with most of us as professors, and it's we really feel gratified when we see our students go beyond where we have gone. And
So
what are your thoughts on the future of steel pan music in the US and internationally?
sure. I think the future is very, very bright. I remember having conversations again with my former teacher and former colleague, the late Dr. Clifford Alexis. Again, he was from Trinidad. He grew up almost during the embryonic stages of the instrument, so he saw it all. And there were times when he could be a bit disillusioned in terms of where the instrument was going. And I would often say to him, well, it's important to keep in mind just how young this instrument is and the strides that have been made in such a short space of time. They've been astronomical, but sometimes it's easy to take those things for granted. So, for example, maybe 40 years ago, most steel pan musicians couldn't read or write music. That is starting to change. You see a lot of young steel pan musicians going into tertiary institutions like the University of the West Indies, University of Trinidad and Tobago. Um, and then again, people all over the world are embracing the instrument and taking it into different musical and physical avenues, So it's very, very bright. Also, the people who are stakeholders, in the steel pan, I think they're a lot more business savvy, you know. And that's something that a lot of us, when we were younger, we weren't really thinking about. I can tell you, in my case, I early on I didn't think about music as a profession. It was just simply something that I enjoyed doing. And people, I guess, enjoyed hearing me play and started compensating me for that, you know. Um, but now I think younger people are combining the art with the business, successfully. And so I'm very, very enthusiastic.
Yes, yes. The future is bright for the
Mhm.
Steelpan. Yes, I agree with you. So I would like to say a great big thank you to you, Professor Liam Teague,
My pleasure.
for
Thank you.
being on Our Culture to the World today. And I wish you continued success. And to our viewers, thank you so much for being with us today. Thank you for watching, and we're going to see you soon as we meet more people and we share their experiences in the next episode of Our Culture to the World. Thank you, Liam, and bye.
Thank you. Bye.